everyone. Welcome to another episode of Yale College Voices, which is a storytelling podcast where we highlight the staff of Yale College. Through our conversations with colleagues across campus, we share the work, values, and lived experiences that shape student life and the Yale College community. So today's conversation is one that I've really been looking forward to. I'm joined today by Maurice L. Harris, PhD, Deputy Director of the Yale Schwarzman Center. So welcome, Maurice.
Thank you. Thank you, Darice.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm so happy to have you here. I was struck by how thoughtfully you approach storytelling in your work. So not just in words, but also in the way that spaces, art, and people come together. And I'm just really looking forward to talking with you about your path. And we just talked about how we crossed paths earlier on. And the work that you do here at Yale. But before we dive in, I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll have a conversation.
All right.
Awesome. So Dr. Maurice L. Harris, pronouns he, him, joined Yale Schwarzman Center in 2020 with more than 20 years of experience in communications, media production, and arts management. As the center's inaugural Director of Marketing and Communications, Maurice played a pivotal role in establishing the center's foundation and identity, building its reputation and visibility. In November 2025, Maurice transitioned into the role of Deputy Director of the Schwarzman Center. In this capacity, he provides strong organizational leadership, oversees day-to-day operations, and collaborates closely with the Executive Director, who happened to be a guest on the podcast last year, to drive the center's mission and values. He also works with internal and external constituencies, including the Schwarzman Center Advisory Board, visiting artists, and local partners on strategies to enhance the center's reach and community engagement. From 2016 to 2020, Maurice worked with the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont as a communications minister, serving on the bishop's staff and helping co-facilitate the Racial Reconciliation and Racial Healing Network. During that time, he also did consulting work with small businesses and nonprofits. Earlier in his career, from 2002 to 2014, Maurice held senior communications roles in the corporate sector, including Assistant Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Fifth Third Bank and Head of Corporate Communications for First Group America, the former parent company of Greyhound, First Student, First Transit, and First Vehicle Services. His career began in the music industry, specifically in artist management, music production, and music licensing. Maurice's discography includes the original compositions for Guiding Light, Another World, As the World Turns, and MTV's Making the Video television series, as well as gold and multi-platinum records, remixes, and collaborations with major and independent recording artists, including Grace Jones, Pocket Size, Blessed Union of Souls, Lakeisha Berry, Jennifer Fouché, Grammy-nominated guitarist Rod Harris Jr., and two-time Grammy Award winner Saunders Sermons. Under the stage name Ione, Maurice is featured on the 2026 Grammy First Round ballot in 2 genre categories across 4 submissions: Best Alternative Music Album, Best Progressive R&B Album, Best Alternative Music Performance, and Best Global Music Performance. Maurice holds a BBA summa cum laude in management from Northwood University and an MS in organizational leadership from Mount St. Joseph University, and also a PhD in ethical and creative leadership with a specialization in Martin Luther King Jr. studies from Union Institute and University. He is an artist and co-founder at 5015 Records, LLC, a creative venture associated with Midnight Oil Collective. In fall 2025, he created and instructed the Yale Residential College Seminar, CSTD 210, Art Making and Leadership, an Integrative Approach. What an amazing and fascinating bio. So I'm so happy to have you here today, Maurice.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I wanted to start by hearing more about you, not just your title here at Yale, but, I can imagine that when people hear your bio, they hear like leadership, communications, art, ethics, creativity. But before all of those things, in terms of who you were becoming before you came to Yale, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Wow, who I was becoming before I came to Yale. Well, the interesting thing is I came to Yale really for the director of marketing and communications position here at the Schwarzman Center. And what I loved about it was from the moment that I read the job description, it looked like somebody had just sort of pulled out my resume
really?
and said, let's write a job description that fits that. I think that so many of the experiences that I had over the years that seemed kind of disparate. There sort of came a point in my life where I realized that all of those roads were converging, and then there was kind of a reason or a purpose for it all. And maybe at some level I kind of knew what that was working toward, but I don't think it came to me sort of consciously until I recognized that there is, sort of place and opportunity that needed the skills that I was bringing in all of those areas that seem so disparate.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so when you think back to your earliest memories, like of creativity, which by the way, are you from Connecticut or?
Where am I from is always a loaded question.
Really?
So I grew up in an Air Force family.
Oh,
yes.
Got it.
Yeah, my mom and my stepdad, and then I had two younger brothers. So I grew up traveling all over with them. Our travels took us from my earliest memories from England to many parts of the United States, to Germany, and then to Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, where I spent the longest sort of stretch before moving to Vermont in 2016 to take on the role at the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont, and then here in 2020, New Haven, Connecticut in 2020 for the Schwarzman Center role.
Oh, that's amazing. So what was that like? Like what? And I know that we talked about, your musical background being sort of secondary to your career, but I am curious, like how did that develop as you were growing up? And it sounds like you moved around quite a bit. So how did that kind of come into play?
I actually loved the moving.
Really?
I remember, as a child, I would get so excited when we would find out where the next place was that we were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think as a child, especially a child who loved kind of the transitional moments, you learn to form connections quickly. And you enjoy the process, I think, of forming connections. So even as an adult, I mentioned that Cincinnati, Ohio was where I'd stayed the longest, graduated from high school there, and then stayed for most of my adult career until relocating in 2016. I was very restless.
Really?
And when I think back on that time living in Cincinnati, I actually moved around the city quite a bit. And I wonder if maybe that was just because of that, that pattern that I had developed as a child. But just the excitement of forming those new connections and then moving here to New Haven and at Yale, all of the very interesting and creative communities that were really an opportunity to get to know has been especially exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. Like, when did you first realize that, I see, like you said, you have a pattern in terms of creative leadership, and then you also studied ethical leadership. And so when did you realize that was something that drew you in or that you were interested in?
Yeah, that itself is a whole sort of interesting journey that we would probably need more than an hour to go into in detail. But the short version of the story is when I had started down the PhD path. So back up, we'll talk about my master's. And I'd always promised to myself that if I achieved my master's in organizational leadership, that I might actually pursue a PhD. It was particularly interesting to me because when I was studying for my MSOL, Master of Science of Organizational Leadership, the sort of the approach to research was more, I would say, quantitative and less qualitative. And for me, it was about the stories. You mentioned that before. And so that sort of resonates with me. It was this sort of the mixed methods research, the qualitative, hearing people and understanding why they think the way they do and make the decisions that they do was the most, those were the most interesting parts to me. And so when I entered the PhD program, I took up the Ethical and Creative Leadership program at Union Institute University because it's such a qualitative focus. And when I entered that program, I was still in that place of trying to understand how my various paths as an artist, as somebody working in corporate business at the time, and as somebody who had this sort of interest in leadership, but was working in communications, all of those things, like how those things fit together. And so I did one of the things that they tell you not to do, which is try to study yourself. So I went in with this whole dissertation idea around work as a calling. Like, what does it mean when you consider your work to be a calling? Because I wanted to understand, how I felt this sort of calling to be a musician, but understanding that music, in many ways, it sort of led me down these various paths, but still wouldn't let me go because I was still very much an artist, producing and behind the scenes while I was living these other lives. And so it was early on in the PhD program, as the faculty got to know me better, that ultimately, before I put pen to paper on my dissertation proposal, one of my faculty members, Dr. Boxall, she pulled me aside, and Dr. Nancy Boxall, and she suggested that I consider writing a creative dissertation, that really leaned into my background as an artist, my professional work as an artist, but then creating this sort of artifact designed around what we've been studying in the leadership program. And so for me, that's kind of where things began to click. And the dissertation that emerged from it was music or popular music as a tool for leading positive social change. And so here you can start to see the threads into Kingian philosophy and my interest in music and leadership studies and stories, and all of those things began to meld together.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. And like going into your PhD, like you said, how do you see that sort of show up in the work that you do in terms of the, pulling all of these different worlds together?
Leadership to me, so my approach to leadership is very interdisciplinary, in that I understand that leadership programs and leadership professors often reside in schools of business. But for me, I can't stress enough the need to sort of disseminate those lessons of leadership, to adapt those lessons of leadership to whatever field that you work in, because individuals are leaders in so many different contexts, and the things that we can learn from sort of the study of leadership, I think translates across disciplines. And so that's how it's been for me. That's how it sort of shows up for me. So when I'm, working as an arts administrator, I'm often tapping into, lessons that I've learned in leadership to be able to relate to people, better, to be able to, conduct business better, or to be a more effective artist. That's a whole topic that became a course, but you mentioned, but that's a whole topic in itself.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And like, what, in terms of the messages you deliver, like in terms of how important leadership is to all of these different areas, was there like a certain point in your career that kind of, sort of cemented all of this for you? I know you mentioned your PhD studies, but was there an experience that just was sort of like a moment that made you think like, this is how it's all coming together for me, or this is something that makes sense, where it just all aligned for you?
I don't think it was any specific moment. It was definitely a series of events, though, beginning with that creative dissertation, that professor that finally had the idea that for some reason I hadn't been able to see this whole time, that all of these things did align, that there is a space for leadership in my art making and leadership, and that these experiences that seem so far removed from each other or the same. And then, I mentioned to you about my experience reading the job description for the Schwarzman Center, the idea that somebody who had a background in arts and communications, and also that experience in corporate marketing and communications, but also understood the nonprofit world and the higher education world, like all of those things, and bringing them together. That was another sort of experience in the process. And even today, I feel like I'm still learning, through collaborations with other artists and other genres and the things that they bring to me and teach me. My friends over at Midnight Oil Collective, I have to give a shout out to them too. Just the continual experiences that I have with them, and the conversations that we have about art making and our places as leaders, but also as business, leaders, and even how to translate that, into being a more effective artist in today's time. So for me, it's a constant sort of process of discovery. It's not growth, not a single moment.
And discovery. Yeah, that's awesome. And you mentioned the seminar which you teach, and can you tell us a little bit more about the seminar and like what led you to that, to doing that?
Absolutely. So the seminar was fall 2024, Art Making and Leadership, an Integrative Approach, as you mentioned. And so first, just a little bit of the background and description of the course. So the focus was on artists in social practice, and it could be a student from any major of any background that also considered themselves to be an artist, but an artist with a sort of message that they were eager to sort of send through their work. So artists in social practice. And in that course, I teach a sort of mashup of design thinking and theory U. So whereas design thinking, the Stanford D School 5-stage design thinking approach, for me seemed like a really wonderful tool that talks about the process of creating, that helps us to sort of map it out in a very graphically very linear, but there are loops and there are sort of, there are sort of roundabout ways of getting through the process. But then you have theory U. And for me, theory U, which is a social change sort of leadership theory, was a really great way of understanding the process of co-creation, why we do what we do. And interestingly enough, the two sort of map to each other very well in terms of like the number of stages that are mapped out in the processes and how those stages sort of align with each other. And so we examine that in the course, and we think about how we might approach our work as artists more intentionally with this notion of co-creation in mind and the design thinking stages in mind. So thinking like designers, thinking like leaders, and then integrating that into our work as artists. And the next stage, of course, is finessing that. So it becomes something that's authentic to ourselves, and so that we're not sacrificing creativity, as it were, for this sort of process. So so that's kind of that's a little bit of the background of the course. You're editing this, right? Because I lost the thread of the question.
That's okay.
So
No, that's okay. No, you answered it in terms of how that came to be, like in bringing those two things together. And do you find that students sort of have those aha moments where, because I would imagine when I think of art making, and like you said, no matter what type of art you're making, right? Like that leadership isn't the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to the art, right? So is that
right? Not necessarily. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's
not necessarily. My philosophy has long been that at the point that you pick up the microphone, at the point that you have an audience that's sort of attending to you as an artist, even if you feel like your work is just made to make people feel good, you've taken a leadership position. Maybe it's a figurehead position. Maybe it's something that has a bit more of a message or philosophy behind it. You need people to do something, to hear something, to understand something. And so in the course, we discuss things like the difference between being politicizing and political. So politicizing, trying to proffer an ideology that tells people that you have to believe the way that I, believe or think the way that I do, or you're wrong, versus political, which may be extending viewpoints and expressing, sharing what is authentically you, and then inviting others to decide for themselves if that's the platform that they also will take up. So I think that when you start thinking that way, you start to bridge the gap between intention and impact. And that really is, one of that really is, I would say, the primary focus of the course is this bridge between intent and impact.
Interesting. Wow, that is really fascinating because and as you're sharing this, I'm even thinking, I love photography, and I did photography on the side for a while, and so it starts making me think of, wow, I never really thought of it that way in terms of having these two things come together. Wow, that's really fascinating. Like, do you think that in terms of creativity, like just based on your own experience and also with students who've participated in your seminar, do you think that their creativity kind of shows up differently depending on like a safety zone, like feeling safe in exploring these two topics, or kind of melding those two topics?
That could be a great sort of test, a great thing for us to tease out in the conversations. If this course is offered again, I love this question because my immediate response would be, I think you would have to ask the students, how they've evolved, how this shows up for them differently since, how creativity sort of comes out of them differently since they've taken the course. One of the sort of messages that I mention in the course is this idea of, I totally stole this from Michael Abels. He's a composer who visited here a few semesters ago. And I just remember him talking about putting the ego aside, this idea of the ego censoring our best work before we have an opportunity to get it out. And so this is an important part of the process, is just allowing the work to just come before you give into the impulse to edit, right? Because if you're editing in the process, then maybe you're kind of holding back the more important parts of the message that could otherwise come forth. So I hope that that's also something that the students take away. I know that that's something that I practice myself.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I even imagine that editing kind of it can be good in some sense, but at the same time, it removes that sort of authenticity, that may be there if you're kind of leaving in mistakes, or what you think may be a mistake, or something that someone else will see as a mistake, but the audience may see it as authenticity, right?
Yeah. So save the editing for, the prototype, if we're going to talk about the process,
right.
To the stage where you have to share the work with the world.
Right.
And you choose that audience with whom you will share it, and an audience, hopefully with feedback that you can receive, and then maybe talk about the editing.
Yeah. Has there ever been, whether it's a piece of art or music or performance that comes to mind, right in this moment, that kind of changed how you understood leadership or power? Like, is there, or maybe something recent where you really felt like, wow, that's a perfect example of what I'm teaching?
My playlist is so incredibly varied, and it changes from generation to generation. So if I think about kind of what I'm listening to most recently, and perhaps one that made the most tremendous impact on me because I feel like it was a real embodiment of what I've aspired through my own practice and then through the teaching, was Black Rainbows by Corinne Bailey Rae. Oh, yeah. And she also performed here at the Schwarzman Center. Yes. And to hear the story behind the Black Rainbows album, and the art on which that whole project is based, and the idea of storytelling through the songs, and the idea, again, of being, political as opposed to politicizing, to be able to look at these objects and think about them in a different way and express that in song, I think was so just right on. It was so perfect. Yeah, I still go back to that. Go back to that album. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I love that. So let's talk about the Schwarzman Center a bit. So as I know from when Rachel appeared on the podcast, it's a gathering place for performances and student life, community. But what does it mean to you in terms of being a place where so many identities and stories intersect? Like what resonates for you the most?
It's super exciting. And I always say that the thing that resonates the most is usually the very last thing that we did, because you're kind of still buzzing from all the energy that goes into putting a major production in the Schwarzman Center. Most recently, that was Galeem, Blush, the dance project. I love movement projects. It didn't occur to me until I heard the talk back with Andrea Miller, the choreographer of Galeem, maybe why it is that I'm so sort of drawn into and intrigued by movement, not being a dancer myself. I mean, I can hold the beat, I can do like a soul step, but that's about all you'll get from me. But it was this idea of dancers not using their voice. She told the story of how she, did a semester of just not speaking when she was at Juilliard, and nobody seemed to notice, which was a very funny story. And I love that, because it was the idea of, dancers expressing their whole selves through their bodies, and how in her own practice, she tries to mix it up a little bit by allowing dancers an opportunity to, put their voice in the work on stage. If you've seen Blush, the work that I'm referring to, and for me, I think that sort of is that is very intriguing. That sort of resonates with me. This idea of being able to how do you express your voice when you don't have your voice? If I didn't have my instruments, in my case, being an electronic musician, there's synthesizers, there's computers, there's and I started playing the piano, but if there were no pianos, if there were no synthesizers, like what would my voice be?
Right. Oh, that's so fascinating. In terms of talking about artists such as the one you just mentioned, when you think about visibility, like being at the Schwarzman Center, how do you determine the artists that you do have visit the center or have performances? How do you determine who's going to be on the roster for the year? Because I attended the let's see, that was back in November, I believe, where you announced what's coming up for the year. But how do you decide when there's so many wonderful artists, and how do you decide who gets that visibility? And
well, the good news, at least for me, is that the job of really sort of surveying that entire universe of artists and deciding which ones to propose to the Schwarzman Center rests mostly with our executive director, Rachel, who you had on a previous episode, and our associate artistic director, Jennifer Harrison Newman. Once it comes to the Schwarzman Center, and then my role as deputy director and former role as director of marketing and communications, then it's about that collaborative leadership process of us sitting down and looking at the artists that have been proposed to determine kind of which ones fit the artistic intent, fit the schedule at the Schwarzman Center. It's a very busy place. We have to have the space available, which spaces can actually accommodate the artists and their artistic vision. Because if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. All of those things factor into how and when and who we get into the Schwarzman Center.
Interesting. And how in terms of your background in marketing and communications, and now your new role as deputy director, what does storytelling mean to you in the institutional setting at Yale? Like, how did that, or did it change, as you first came on board in 2020, and then as you progressed to your current role? Has that changed or evolved for you?
Well, how we've been able to tell our stories certainly has. If you recall, something happened in early 2020. The whole world changed.
Right.
And, for us, the unexpected change in how we would tell our stories was our focus shifted from, this sort of physical bringing in of artists and presenting them on stages to what can we do virtually, what can we do online. And then in my role as director of marketing and communications, at the time, we were still putting the finishing touches on a brand new website for the Schwarzman Center. And that became our primary platform for delivering the artists. So a lot of partnership with our associate artistic director, Jennifer, on what it is we could do and render digitally. We did a web series during that time. We did some watch parties, some screenings online with conversations. So a lot of really interesting things that happened during that time, even amid the sort of stark backdrop of the pandemic. And then moving into real life, as we, were able to sort of gradually open our doors. And now we think about today where our big message is free and open to the public, which is a tremendous part of our message, and is a really important gift that we have, that we love to be able to share. And I think that also impacts our storytelling, because it will, of course, affect the selection of artists that we bring in. You think about the intention on family programming. We've had a couple of artists. I'm remembering Sonia de los Santos a season or two ago, who did a family-centered performance for children and families, mostly in Spanish, which was really wonderful. So just being able to tell our stories in different ways to different audiences, and has been an important part of the experience.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I love what's so awesome about the center is, like you said, being free and open to the public. And what's interesting is that if you see something going on, you have to get on it right away because it will sell out very quickly. Right. Yeah.
Right. That was, and folks, I think they see the Schwarzman Center and they say, Director of Marketing and Communications that doesn't have to sell any tickets. How wonderful. Creates a new set of challenges, to your point. So it's the question of access now. If we are authentically, intending to be free and open to the public, then I work very closely, with our visitor services manager to create a sort of ticketing process that will allow everyone who wishes to have an opportunity to experience our events to be able to get that ticket. You do have to set your clock, though, because they go quickly. Exactly. We're up on the wait list. Yeah. But that being said, for us to know with some assurance that we've got a great representation from both the New Haven community and from our Yale community is a really wonderful sort of achievement for us. And even more importantly, that we've pretty much got it down to a science. Christian, our visitor services manager, has it down to a science. I love that he is able to sort of predict, how big a wait list can be, how many walk-ups we're going to have, how many people are actually going to honor that ticket that they book, so that we have a full house almost every time without having to turn people away. That's awesome. Most of the time.
Yeah, that is so awesome. It reminded me of days years ago when you couldn't go online to buy tickets. You had to go to the ticket booth to buy a concert ticket, and stay, waiting till that moment, to purchase. Which I love that it's available to the public, and that, again, it opens it up to the community to be able to come in and, and see a performance, or even just to, for example, the museums have also offered free admission. And I happened to be here in New Haven with my son a week ago, and we had some time to kill. And I was like, oh, let's just go to the Arts Museum and walk around for a little bit. And it was actually, we were kind of sad that we had to leave because, it was so nice to be able to do that on the fly and enjoy something and learn something, and it was free and it was flexible, so that we could do that at the spur of the moment. So not so much, like you said, you have to really get on the ticket, right? But again, I just love that it's open to the community in that way, and offering that opportunity.
Yeah. And not everything we've done requires a ticket. Not everything we do requires a ticket. We do have our Schwarzman exhibitions right now. Shining Light on Truth, Black Lives at Yale and in New Haven is still going. And that is a phenomenal exhibition to see. Then we have... we had Leo Villarreal earlier this academic year, Tony Dove. So we have, when Tony Dove was in gallery mode, she also did the performances, but when her work was in gallery mode. So if my big pitch for the Schwarzman Center for anybody, listening or watching is to check out our website just to see what's going on. Not everything requires a ticket, but everything is free and open to the public. So,
and I love that. Like you said, just to come in and see an exhibit. Yes. And again, it's like if you have half hour, just to be able to come in and do that, I think it's an amazing opportunity. And yes, I definitely say the same, like just check out the website so that you could see what's available. And it does change, right? Like how frequently, do you change the exhibits? Is there a particular schedule that you follow?
There's no set schedule
Yep.
That we follow, but yes.
Yeah. So you have to check, right?
Yes.
So have you ever had to advocate, for like a particular story, or, maybe something just wasn't as publicized, or it was too quiet or too complex? Like, have you ever had to advocate for a particular art form or story at the center that you wanted to bring in?
For me, again, in my role as Director of Marketing and Communications, I, for a while, was overseeing the Storyboard platform. So that's our online exhibition platform. That platform has since actually very recently transitioned to Carlin Robinson, our Associate Director of Venues and Exhibitions. And but when Storyboard was conceived, there was no exhibitions department. It was back during those early days when marketing was literally a department of one, and we were trying to figure out kind of what we do in this pandemic space. And this idea of Storyboard was conceived. When we moved back into real life programming, though, and our focus and our priorities necessarily shifted to what we could do in person, I'll admit I was concerned that Storyboard might fall by the wayside, but we had tapped into something that we had recognized, resonated with students, this idea of being able to submit their work without a sense of competition. Just express yourself, be your authentic self, and in perhaps environments that are pretty full of competition, to be able to just relax. And if you're on break, make a piece of work that expresses yourself around a certain prompt, a certain theme, and have the opportunity to have that work shown online. And we found that was actually very popular online, and ultimately one iteration of Storyboard became our very first Schwarzman exhibition, so the first installed exhibition in our spaces. So we sort of tested it in our exhibition space. And then, fast forward, I think, to today, it was, I believe, just with the persistence of really standing behind that platform and that opportunity, things began to catch on, and it grew to the point that folks were actually reaching out and asking about when Storyboard would come online each semester, and what the prompt would be. And so I was really excited at the point that we were calling this an official sort of exhibition space, and I could hand off this work that had been built to somebody who actually specializes in curating exhibitions to take it further. So I would say that I think for me is one of the things that I really advocated for, and I was pleased to see that paid off.
And it's continuing. Yeah, that is so awesome. In terms of kind of taking a step back to like your PhD and your special focus on, and it just so happens that yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, and I can imagine that focus shaped your identity, in terms of how you show up in leadership spaces. So I was curious if you could share, what made you choose that focus, and, how do you see it show up in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I have to go all the way back to, I believe it was my junior or senior year in high school. I was thinking about this just the other day, just yesterday, in fact, when I was reflecting on sort of MLK Day and what that meant to me. I was thinking about Mrs. Walker. She was my U.S. history and government teacher, and it was either my junior or my senior year. And it was Mrs. Walker who had inspired me to use my creativity to sort of deepen my understanding of history. There's a whole story around that. I wrote a song about the abolition movement and won this competition, and I got to present it at the Cincinnati Museum Center. It was really wonderful, and that experience kind of really stuck with me. But it was also Mrs. Walker that introduced me to this idea of the Kingian philosophy. And so, fast forward many years later, just over the years, reflecting on what ways that philosophy could prove useful to us today. And really, especially in today's time, asking how effective this philosophy would be in times like this. And I feel like that's a very sort of difficult thing for me to even say when we see, especially in the world of leadership, we teach one kind of leadership, but then when we see another kind of leadership in practice, that can be very challenging, right? And so yesterday I was reminded of one of King's quotes. It was from his 1960 speech at Spelman, I believe it was, where if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving forward, right? And so that for me, it's this idea of this persistence, this perseverance, that whatever you can do to keep moving forward. And I feel like right now, when I am inclined to be sort of taken, pulled down by the weight of maybe the things that are going on around us in the world, in the political climate. For me, it's just reminding myself to keep moving forward, even in whatever small way that I can, even if I feel like I'm crawling, just to keep moving forward.
Right.
And encouraging others to do the same.
Yes. And that's so important right now, especially, like you said, just with everything going on around us, just to continue reminding folks of that when we start to get too locked into what's happening and feeling the weight of it all, but to continue going, right?
Yeah.
Is there, thinking back to, your studies, is there a version of yourself that you sort of had to, I don't want to say unlearn, but maybe just habits, right? Like habits that you had to change in order to be able to lead more honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
Unequivocally, yes. So I think about, in my master's study, there was like a psychological component to this. So there's like so many self-assessments that you do. And just kind of learning about my own idiosyncrasies, and then even my time here at Yale. So we've had the opportunity to experience some of Yale's leadership offerings together. And one that I did beyond the Emerge program involved a 360-degree assessment. This was just last year. And so again, just kind of taking a deep dive into understanding how others see your leadership, and are there things that you maybe didn't see about yourself, and having to embrace that feedback and accepting what it means to change.
Yeah. I always find that I've done the same 360 feedback, right? And I remember the first time around that I did it, it was almost like they had to prepare me, right? Like prepare yourself, because initially you see the feed. I think I was very defensive the first time around, and I did it. I'm trying to remember how long ago, but it was quite some time ago. So I needed some time, right, to sort of digest, the feedback, but also learning that, as they say, as I've learned in other, leadership programs, it's, feedback is a gift, right? And learning to use it in a way that, you don't take it as you're defensive about it, but just taking, processing, digesting, but also taking the pieces that that help you grow, right?
Yes.
Like that help you grow in certain areas, especially your strengths, right?
Yeah.
So did you find that, what were some examples that if you don't mind sharing, like what were some examples that you found very helpful, in terms of that feedback?
So, I find myself like still slipping up in places. And I think for me, where I find myself slipping up is when I have decided how something will be for myself, and then to have to take in kind of other ideas about how that thing could be. And I very recently experienced that. So, I do have to also mention, as you said earlier, taking in that feedback, being appreciative for that feedback. Right. It took me a long time to develop the discipline to just say, thank you for the feedback. I heard this saying that no one can give you feedback that will make you less smart. So the worst that can happen is that if they give you feedback that you consider to be bad feedback, then you'll just be the same as you always were, right? So it's easy to say thank you for the feedback if you think about it that way. The flip side of it is you just might learn something that can help you to improve, right? And so very recently, I know that I found myself in a situation where I was just really stuck on a plan of how I wanted to do that thing. And then, I had a coworker approach me and present an alternative idea. I just wasn't, ready to hear it at that time. I don't think it occurred to me until later how just sort of elegant their alternative solution was. But then that's another piece of it, though. But then being able to go back and apologize and say, you know what, I'm sorry. You came to me with a phenomenal idea, and I very quickly dismissed it. I sort of went back into that old pattern instead of really kind of, just sitting on it and listening and really hearing what you had to say, because it occurred to me much later that was a much better plan, and I think I need to change my decision based on it. So and that I think is an important part of leadership too. I think the kind of leadership that we often see today is a sort of unyielding, unapologetic. You can't really be human. You have to be strong. You have to know everything, which is unfortunate and can be very detrimental. So I think there is, as I strive to be a better leader, for me, there's also developing this practice of thanking people for their feedback, being able to hear other voices even after I've made up my mind, and if I'm wrong, just to be able to say I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's so important to, like you said, to be able to say you're sorry, or even just acknowledging, that I don't have all the answers, right? And that took me a long time to, I don't know, come to terms with that. For me, it was like, oh yeah, I don't have to have all the answers, and just realizing that it's okay to not have all the answers, and to, rely on the people around me to help me. Okay, I don't have the answers, but how do I get there? And to use that. If I, may wax a little bit academic here, I always think about and talk about the distinction between heroic leadership versus what we call post-heroic leadership. So there's this heroic version where the leader is seen as this sort of great figure that has the answers to everything, or they try to be, right? And then there's this post-heroic leadership, and I believe we're living in this sort of age of post-heroic leadership where people are more interested in collaborative approaches. They want to have their voices heard, where lived experience matters just as much as maybe what you learned in school. So these are all of these lessons that I think make one a better leader, especially in this age of post-heroic leadership. Yeah, I agree. And when you think about that, and when you interact with students, for example, in your seminar, what when they first come to your seminar, right? Like, what do you hope they feel, when it comes to exactly that? Like, when students, and I'm only assuming because I haven't been a student, and well, I shouldn't say that. I am a student again, but I'm in my doctorate program. But I, thinking about it, when I think of my professors, right? We think professors must have all the answers, right? We think, yes, they know everything, and so how do you relay that same thing to your students, where it's, you're often exploring alongside with them, or do you come across that at all?
That I think is really interesting, because I enjoyed the challenge. So the seminar that I taught here was my first sort of seminar experience here at Yale, and I really enjoyed the challenge of the really great questions that I got. And so for me, it wasn't difficult to say, let me research that a little bit because I could give you my opinion on that topic, but I actually want to give you a more comprehensive answer. And so when we get together next week, let's talk about it, right? Yeah. And I appreciated that not only did the students respect that when we encountered those, but they would also do some reading up on their own. So by the time we got together the next week, it was more of a conversation about what they've learned and explored on their own about this topic, what I've learned as well. And then we can sort of, bump ideas and decide for ourselves how we want to think about this whatever principle it was that we were covering.
Yeah, that's exciting. And like, what were some, if you don't mind, what are some questions that they would ask, or are there any that kind of stand out in your mind as you think back?
Yeah, so the questions tended to be about the theory U model.
Oh, interesting.
So without going too deeply into the theory U model, it can be a very sort of complex thing to look at, sort of this idea of U-shaped change, and at what point are you working sort of independently as an artist, and at what point do you involve others in the sort of co-creation of your work? And what does that mean? And to what extent should their input impact your output? So it's kind of things like that, and sort of refining and finessing how to use that model in a way that feels authentic to oneself.
Oh, interesting. So now, as you could see, we've already been talking for almost an hour. But before I, start to wrap up, of course, I have to acknowledge like you said, the Grammy ballot. So, yeah. So, if you don't mind sharing a little more about that, because I think it's such a amazing accomplishment. And I know that you said in other circles, they may see it differently, but I think it's truly amazing. I want your autograph. So tell us a little bit more.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It's very kind. I certainly don't want to be, self-deprecating, but at the same time, I don't want to oversell it. A lot of folks are unfamiliar that there are sort of 3 stages to the process. One has to be nominated to appear on the ballot. Right. And then from the folks who are on the ballot, your nominees, so those who get their Grammy nomination, those are selected. And then finally, from the nominees, the award winners are chosen. And in order to make it on the ballot, you have to be nominated by a voting member of the Recording Academy of the Grammys. And, in my case, I've often said, sometimes it doesn't really matter the size of the audience. It's kind of who's in the audience and the influence that individual has. And it just so happened that somebody who was very tuned into my music happened to be a voting member and was interested in seeing what might happen if she submitted my work for several categories. She was a friend of mine, and I got the call saying, hey, I put your works in. Not really sure what would happen. A lot of material that's submitted at this stage is cut at this stage, but I put it in and it was accepted in all 4 categories, and it would be on the ballot. So that was really wonderful. Cool. So there was a whole for your consideration, campaign that went out about my work that probably very few people in the world have heard. I don't have, a tremendous social media following or an audience of that size, but I do my work because I love this work. I feel called to my work as an artist. And over the years, the work has seemed to find its audience. Of course, there's been some marketing support to that as well, my efforts and the efforts of others. But at the same time, again, to know that my music is being listened to by individuals who want to use their influence to take it further, that was a very sort of special and meaningful moment for me. And I think, if anything, I like to use that story to encourage other artists who may feel like there may be, kind of that tree falling into the forest, whatever, to continue to do what it is they are doing and to continue to put their message out and to stand behind it and to refine their craft, that it may take time, over the years. I can think of so many examples of artists who have found maybe the peak of their success much later in their career as artists. In my case, I feel like it's been sort of ebbs and flows. We think about my early career where I was writing background music for television shows and doing remix work for major labels, and then moving into corporate life where music took more of a backseat, and then now transitioning into my Yale life where music gets to live very happily beside my arts administration career, right? Yeah. So not necessarily a linear path, but something that just reaffirms to me that, if I feel that I'm called to be a musician, to be an artist, that's something that I can do, and that there are people who maybe are sort of enlivened by that message.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I wanted to mention that because like you said, you're doing your work here, but you also have these other interests and that it can happen, right? And I think it's so important to share that message, like you said, with students or other artists who, like you said, maybe become frustrated or along the way and start questioning it, what am I doing kind of thing. And knowing that when you keep at it, that things can happen, right?
And to immerse yourself in environments that allow you to bring your whole self. We talk about that, about being able to bring one's whole self to work, to whatever context they find themselves in life. And I can think of times in my life where I felt very sort of divorced from my creative community because I'm not allowed to bring my artist self into that space. But then there are other examples. Yale is a great one where working here at Yale, I feel like that has been invited. I have a concert coming up this Saturday at Lost in New Haven, and our executive director was so excited to announce to the whole staff in our weekly all staff meeting several weeks ago that this was taking place, and inviting them to come out and enjoy it too. And we have other members of our team who also have creative work outside of the Schwarzman Center, and we're happy to support them in their efforts as well. That's awesome. So I really love that, being in a community that can see you both that can see me both in my administrative role and in my artistic role.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think that's one of the great things about working here is just being, like you said, being able to carry that authentic self into your work. So before we end, Maurice, I'm wondering too, if you could tell us more, like what else do you like to do? I know you have your work here at Yale, and your work as a musician, and you have a performance coming up. So what other things do you have time to do?
I think that's a great way to phrase the question. What other things do I have time to do? I love music. I love composing. I love attending concerts. My husband and I will take off and we'll attend concerts. MetLife Stadium has become, I think, our favorite new thing. All these touring bands go to. I think one of my favorite recent shows was The Weeknd. The Weeknd was there, and we also saw Oasis after that. So we've seen some really fun shows. So maybe music, I think, is the easy answer, but music and reading as well. I don't find the time, as much time as I like, to sit down and crack open a book. So Audible has become my second best friend, where I just use up all my Audible credits on reading. Most of my reading has to do with leadership studies in some way. I still really am intrigued by and enjoy that topic. And enjoy both the practitioner and the scholarly sides of it. So kind of looking at both and how they compare.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. Maurice, I'm like, it's been awesome just to sit and get to know you because, and I giggled to myself because when I first reached out, you were probably super busy, right? And you missed the email, but at the same time, when I do invite folks on the podcast, I try not to be annoying. I don't nag anyone to come join me, but it felt like, okay, timing, right? And then when I saw that you were promoted to your new role, I was like, this is the perfect time. And I just feel, lucky to be able to get to know you better. And like you said, we've crossed paths before, but I never got to know like where you're from and, all of your background in music. And I actually didn't know about your musical background until I saw the it may have been on LinkedIn. It was a post about your upcoming performance. And I said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. That's so amazing. But I think, a great, I guess, point to end on is, like you said, with it being MLK Day yesterday and all that's going on around us and your work here at Yale, like you said, just being able to keep moving, right? And keep if you can't walk, crawl, all of those things. Looking back, like, I guess my last question would be, if you could sit across from your younger self today, what would you tell yourself? Like, what advice would you give your younger self?
Don't be afraid to take the once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And the emphasis would be on the don't be afraid part. Throughout my life, up to this point, I've been presented with what I would call these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, these things that if you don't take that chance probably won't come around again. But for me, there was often great fear associated with taking that leap. And I wonder how I would have maybe succeeded or flourished in those areas if there had been less fear. Certainly no sense of regret with the choices that I've made, because it's all part of, being human. It's all part of the process of learning and growing. But I think if I had the message to give to my younger self, it would be about less fear. Take those once in a lifetime opportunities, but don't be fearful of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's a perfect point to end on. And again, Maurice, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing more about yourself. I think it takes a lot for people to just join me and do that and be authentic about it, and to kind of open up your own life story to the world who's possibly listens to this podcast. So I just thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was really wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So yeah, we're going to end on that note. So thank you so much.
All right.